let's take a look at an overview of a lot of the things that you're going to be doing with while loops. For this program, we're going to have some user input. So import java.util.scanner, and we can include it here. Scanner input equals new scanner. There we go. Okay. So there's three kinds of variables that we're going to be using with our program, and this is very common across most loops. So the first one is a counter. So it counts how many iterations through the loop. So typically it counts up by one every time. So an iteration is the term used for like one pass through the loop. And the counter always, well, typically grows by an amount you can predict. So usually one, but sometimes it grows by a multiple or follows some kind of pattern. And the counter needs to be initialized. So here, before we get started, we're going to set the counter's value to 0. So by contrast, a different kind of variable that we're going to use a lot is an accumulator. Also gets initialized. So this one collects values through the loop. And we're going to see that in this program here, it unpredictable growth. So by comparison to the counter, it's going to serve some other purpose of like collecting some kind of values as we go through. And it doesn't always have to be a number. It can be words or an array, which we haven't used yet. But there's a lot of things that an accumulator could be, not necessarily a number. And then the last one is now there's two words for this. It's either a sentinel or a flag. So this here is usually the condition for ending a loop. And just put as a note, sometimes called flag. Okay, so these are the main three variables that are used in all looping. So we're going to use those in a combination to solve a problem. So what we'll have is we'll have a series of scores. So this is going to be entered by the user. And then what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the average. So we're going to get the average of those values. Okay. So there's a couple different ways to do this. Now, do we use a while loop or a do while loop? So two kinds of loops. Do while usually is used for at least one iteration. So we know that the loop is going to run at least one time, and we have it start with a while instead, if possibly will not be run. So potentially you might want to use a loop to count something up, but based on some other condition, a while will prevent that from actually happening. So for this do while loop that we're going to see here, we'll start it with the word do. These work and look exactly like in a lot of other programming languages. In this one, we're going to prompt the user. So do, and then in here, so we'll have a system.out.print. We're going to prompt the user for the score. So enter a score, and then we'll tell them 0 to quit. and then the score is going to become equal to input.nextInt. There we go. So in this case, we wouldn't have wanted to put our end condition of 0 at the beginning because it might have ended based on the score being initialized to 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep doing this while the score does not equal the sentinel or the end condition. So this, I'm just going to remind, 0 to quit. So that is going to be the end condition. So now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the total, which is going to be the accumulator. So we're going to have the accumulator increase by 1 every time. So the accumulator is going to grow by the value of the score, and then the counter is going to increase by value of 1 every time we go through the loop. So now, after the loop is finished, what we have to do is we have to calculate what is the average of these values. So every time we go through the loop, the user is going to enter a number. It's going to increase the accumulator by that number and then count how many numbers were entered. When the user enters a 0, this will be a false statement. So a do-while loop will end when statement is false. So if you want to think about this, a while condition is like, if this is the case, then loop. So it's like an if statement. So if the score does not equal the sentinel, then loop. So you can kind of think about it like that if that helps you figure that out. Okay, so now the average gets the value of, now we're going to typecast the accumulator, which is currently an integer, as a double so that we can get some decimal places, and we will divide that by the counter. And let's take a look at what we've got. So system.out.print ln, the average, and then we'll add the average here at the end. There we go. So let's take a look at what our program does now. So if I run this, so enter a score 0 to quit. 3, 7, 12, I'll put a 0. So we get an average of 5.5. So now what I want to do is usually you want to do a little bit of problem solving just to make sure that it works. So let's pick something, an average that we will know without having to calculate. So enter a score. Let's do 5, 5, and 5. So 5, 5, 5. So if 3 people get a score of 5 on whatever this is, the average is going to be 5. But we're going to see that the average is not 5. It gives us 3.75. So now we have to go back and we have to problem solve a little bit. Well, what happened here? So sometimes it's good to put a couple listeners, but we're not going to put them in the loop. We're going to just put them afterwards, which will show what the values are equals. So system.out.println, let's say the total is, and let's take a look at the total, which is stored in the accumulator. And then system.out.println, number of scores. And this is going to be our counter. So let's run that again and see what we get. So I do 5, 5, 5, and then a 0. And so we got our total of 15, but the problem here is it's being divided by 4. And take a look at what it's doing. This is 1 number, 2 numbers, 3 numbers, and 4 numbers. What it's doing is it's including 0 as one of the numbers to be averaged. So we want to put in the most logical fix to solve this. I see some people try to solve this by cheating. They'll do something like this. Okay, you know that the score or the counter is one higher than it should be, so let's put a counter minus minus here, which is kind of like a bad way of doing that, because if somebody else is looking at your program, this doesn't look like it's making sense, and you need to put some commenting. What we want to do is think about this loop logically. So they enter a number, and it gets stored here. We have to do that. But you don't actually always want to do these two steps. You really only want to accomplish this if they gave you a proper score. If they gave you a 0, you don't want to do this. So this is where we can put in an if statement. So if the score does not equal, so if the score equals Sentinel, so that means we're not going to be doing this. If the score does not equal the Sentinel, then we're going to be accomplishing this. So if they entered any number other than 0, then this is going to run. If they entered a 0, this is going to be a false statement. It's going to skip over this so that the counter won't go up, and then we'll get the proper answer. So let's take a look at that again. 5, 5, 5, and then 0. And you can see, because we used this method, you don't always have to do the same thing every time you go through a loop. Because we use this method, we actually got the right answer at the end. So this program shows you how to use the main 3 variable types: counters, accumulators, and sentinels, and you're going to see them come up time and time again in virtually every loop program that you write.